We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. We've got a great show lined up for you. In our first hour, we'll be talking with James B. Lockhart III about his book, America, Underwater and Sinking. Sounds a little ominous, but it's important as budget negotiations continue in Washington right now, and as Moody's just downgraded the government's credit rating because of all the debt. In our second hour, we'll go to Dr. David S. Dockery. He is president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and we'll be talking about the history of Baptist, the seminary, and the challenges that Baptists and Christians face right now. But first, we're going to turn to James Lockhart. He is distinguished, has a distinguished career in multiple government agencies, and he's a senior fellow at the Bipartisan Policy Center, and he's had a long career in investment banking and so forth. But we're going to be talking about his government career and his book, America, Underwater and Sinking. I'm going to hold this up so you can see it. It's been out recently. And what he's doing in there, James has been at the heart of a lot of financial crises going on in the federal government, both with pensions in the early 1990s, then also with Social Security in the mid-2000s, and then with the federal housing authorities at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac during the financial crisis and the housing crisis. James, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Merrill. Thank you for having me.
Now, you've got your book out, America, Underwater and Sinking, but you started your career in the Navy, I believe.
Yeah, and actually the title somewhat comes from that because I was an officer of the deck on a ballistic missile submarine sailing with, in those days, there's missiles pointed towards Russia. So I was in the Navy for 3 years, and obviously, we were underwater at that point, and unfortunately, my other jobs in government were also underwater one way or another.
Now, tell us how you got started in government, because I think for a while you went to school with George W. Bush, I believe, but you ended up starting with the Pension Guaranty Trust Benefit Corporation in the late 1989.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, you're right. I did go to school, actually, both high school, college, and business school with George W., President 43, as he calls himself sometimes. But yes, I worked for his father running the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. You know, it's one of the things, the motto of Yale, where we both went to college, and so did George H.W., was for informal model, was for God, for country, and for Yale. And so there was always that desire to do something for the government and work. And actually, I start out my book with a quote from George H.W., and it is something like this: "There is nothing more fulfilling than to serve your country and your fellow citizens, and to do it well." And that's difficult. Obviously, a lot of people serve our country, and it's a very important thing. And I was pleased to do it with the BBDC. Doing it well is always a challenge in government. Every government, every administration has issues that are very challenging.
Well, when you come in, we have the savings and loan crisis. You have a number of companies that are struggling with their pensions, and the PBGC was sort of a backstop for those pension plans if a company started going under and they weren't able to pay their pensions.
Yeah, that's correct. That's their mission. The mission is really to protect Americans in their corporate pension plans primarily. And when a company went bankruptcy in my day, you're right, there was the S&L crisis, but probably there was a recession. Steel companies were going under. A lot of the airlines went under or had troubles: TWA, Pan Am, Eastern, Continental, and in many cases we had to step in to protect the pensions of the people who had worked 20, 30 years for a company and could have had their pensions cut dramatically. So it was a very important issue. And the problem was, as really in all my government jobs, the legislation that set it up was not properly done and didn't change as times changed. Companies paid a premium originally, and it was set up after the Studebaker bankruptcy of $1, and now it's well over $100 per person. So you can see that things have changed. Now actually PBGC, after many, many fixes, is actually very solvent. But it took decades and decades. It's, I think, about 40 years old now.
Well, I knew people who were working for various companies that their pensions went under around that time, and they just felt like they didn't get the full benefit that they should have because it wasn't set up initially correctly.
Yeah, well, that's part of the issue. Now, when Congress set it up, they didn't want to cover the full benefit. Mm-hmm. The theory was that if they covered the full benefit, in particular, unionized workers would just keep asking for benefit increases, knowing the government was behind it. So the idea that there was a haircut, now the haircut, not surprisingly, went to the better paid people than the lower paid. But yes, there was a haircut, and it was sort of, that part was actually somewhat sound from an insurance standpoint. Another quote talking about insurance in my book, and I think it's maybe in the first chapter, was a quote from Ben Bernanke, who I worked with in the financial crisis. But his quote was, "Some people have described the federal government as an insurance company with an army. The two things it does is insures people's health and retirement and runs the military." And in many ways, I worked at three of the biggest. But there's actually 150 different insurance companies in the U.S. government protecting everything from crops to things you've never even heard of. And so oftentimes they're set up by Congress without really thinking them through. As I said, PBGC wasn't originally. And it's taken many, many fixes for PBGC. And in fact, they have multi-employer plans, which are union plans, and then single company plans. And the multi-employer plans were in big trouble, and they actually got a bailout about 6 years ago of like $80 billion, even though in theory the PBGC was not backed by the U.S. government. So the PBGC really has a very important mission and has protected I don't know, maybe 30 million people over the years. So it's a very important program that a lot of people don't really even know about.
Well, I want to get next to the Social Security because, as you mentioned, you worked at three of the largest agencies dealing with financial issues, PBGC, then Social Security as George W. Bush was looking to reform it, and then at the Federal Finance Housing Agency as we were facing the financial crisis. And one has to wonder, what did you do wrong to get into all three of these at major times of crises? So hold on a second. We'll come back. When we come back, I want to talk about Social Security because it's a major issue. It's a major issue again. And we have more information about Jim Lockhart on our website, pointofview.net. You can go there and find out more about him. We also have a link to his book, America, Underwater and Sinking. So stay with us. We'll be back with our interview with Jim Lockhart.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The Department of Health and Human Services has released a 409-page study that reviews the evidence concerning gender dysphoria and transgender medicine. President Trump's January 28th executive order calls for the department to publish a review of the literature on best practices for promoting the health of children who assert gender dysphoria, rapid onset gender dysphoria, and other identity-based confusion. The report finds that many of the studies done in support of transitioning minors suffer from serious methodological flaws. The report finds that the U.S. medical associations create a perception of consensus in favor of pediatric medical transitions. such as puberty blockers, gender transition surgery, they also conclude that there is no evidence that pediatric medical transition reduces the incidence of suicide, which remains fortunately very low. In many ways, the report reinforces others that have surfaced. The most significant was the UK's Cass review, conducted by British pediatrician Hilary Cass. It found little evidence that puberty blockers and surgery improve the mental well-being of children. Other countries, including Sweden and Finland, have also backed away from such medical interventions. The growing international alarm about gender transitions hasn't reached the U.S. until recently. That is probably why the report's 9 authors, medical doctors, medical ethicists, and a methodologist, choose to remain anonymous. They have seen the vicious attacks against anyone challenging transgender surgery. Although the report makes no policy recommendations, it does challenge some of the current practices. This is what has been needed in the transgender debate. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of Patriot Preachers, go to viewpoints.info/Patriot Preachers. Viewpoints.info/Patriot Preachers. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. Our guest for this hour, James B. Lockhart III. We're talking about his book, America, Underwater and Sinking, which highlights his role over several years in the federal government, where he was working with the various financial institutions and efforts to reform or to fix them. And James, you were at Social Security as the chief operating officer of the Social Security Administration. I guess George W. Bush put you in that position. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I will. Actually, I would just answer the question you said about how I get those 3 really bad jobs right before the break. Actually, it was funny. I was doing an editorial board with the Wall Street Journal, and Paul Gigot, who was the head of the editorials in those days, asked me that very question. And he said, did I make George W. mad at me in school? Actually, no, and that was not the answer. I guess I just love challenges. And Social Security was certainly a big challenge then. As you may remember, that was one of the big things that President Bush ran for on his reelection in 2004. And, you know, I had as number 2 there, but also his prime supporter on Social Security reform. I spent a whole year out on the road, probably doing well over 100 interviews, trying to push for Social Security reform. It was funny because we had a menu of potential ways to fix it. Some were related to increasing taxes, some reducing benefits or slowing down the growth of benefits, and some were investments. And we had a little simulator, and all the younger people really liked it and all thought Social Security reform was going to be great. But unfortunately, the elder generation who vote didn't think so. President Bush had promised that no one with over 55 would have their benefits changed, but there was a lot of demagoguing going on. And as President Bush said in his book, and it's been quoted many times, Social Security is the third rail of American politics, and he touched it, and it was toast. And he was toast, and we were toast. But it was the right cause. Unfortunately, we could not get people like AARP on board to and other organizations to help fix it. But it was a big need then. The cost back then would have been dramatically less than it is today. In those days, one of the issues was I think it was like 30 some years away from insolvency. Now it's like 8 years away from insolvency. And so, there should be more of a sense of urgency today. But, President Trump and many others have promised not to touch it. And that's unfortunate because people's benefits will be cut in 8 years by over 20%. And we need to do something. Now, some people say, well, the government will just write out checks. But that's in 8 years, that's like $500 billion extra that the government would have to pay. So it's not an easy issue, Social Security reform. We did a lot of other good things in George W.'s administration, including he had something called the President's Management Agenda, which is sorely needed back again in this government, where we need to manage it better. Doge tried to do some of that, but I think they took the sledgehammer or chainsaw, whatever you want to call it, and cut out some of the good stuff and left some of the fat there. And what we need to do is better manage it, which we did at Social Security in those days. We certainly spent a lot of time on the management side, which doesn't really get as much credit as it should in this government, but it's important.
To give our readers, our listeners, some background, Social Security was created in 1935 as a pay-as-you-go system. So people who are working today, they pay into the system, and what they're paying in goes out to pay current beneficiaries. So there is no, the money is just pay-as-you-go. I'm not creating a separate account for me that's set aside, that's gaining interest or anything of that nature. And so that looked like it would probably work initially, but because we have so many baby boomers who are retiring and there are fewer workers paying into Social Security, it's becoming harder and harder to be able to make those payments simply because there's more retirees and fewer workers as in the ratio than there was back in 1935, 1940, 1950, 1960. And that's creating a financial cliff for us if we're not careful, right?
That's correct. In fact, there was in probably the mid-'80s, I think 1983 or so, we came to that cliff. And then Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill and President Reagan did a deal. And they slowed down the growth of benefits. They started to gradually increase the retirement age and did some other fixes. And actually, it then built up an excess. That pay-as-you-go system actually started to build up a relatively significant trust fund, which is invested in treasuries. So it's really government owing itself. The government took that money and spent it somewhere else. But in theory, on Social Security's books, they have a trust fund. But at this point, it's shrinking because not only the interest is not enough, but the payments in from today's workers are not enough. So that's shrinking. And as I said, in 8 years, there'll be nothing there. And so the pay-as-you-go will just not work. And as I said, it will be about $500 billion short in that first year and continue to grow. Mm-hmm. The numbers are staggering for Social Security. It pays probably about 68 million people between its retirement and disability and survivors benefits, and almost 170 million pay into it. It is by far the biggest government program with about 1.5 or $6 trillion of payments a year. Mm-hmm. So it's an extremely critical program to the American people. But the finances, as you said, are dramatically weakening. As us baby boomers are retiring or have retired, and it used to be like 5-to-1 workers, and now it's almost 2-to-1 workers to retirees. And that just can't work. And that's the reason for the need for reform. President Bush saw that need a long time ago. And as I said, if we had done it and allowed people to have personal voluntary accounts, the system would be solvent today.
As you suggest, President Bush proposed private accounts, personal accounts. You worked on that. Explain to us what that means, because I've been a long-time supporter of that. We've talked about it here on Point of View. What would a private or personal account look like, and how would it work?
Yes. Well, again, these were voluntary, so people less than 55 could set up an account, and part of the payments they were going to be making into Social Security would have gone into these personal accounts. And they could have invested it like an IRA or 401k, and they would have a choice of like 5 different relatively simple index funds, and they would still have a basic Social Security benefit, but most of their future retirement would come from these personal accounts. Obviously, the stock market in that period, despite all the ups and downs, has gone up pretty dramatically. Mm-hmm. And those people would have been a lot better off than they are today. But that's a problem. But it's unfortunately at this point the finances of Social Security and the cost of fixing it are so it's well over $20 trillion to do it today. Personal accounts, unfortunately, it's too late for them. And so you have to do other things. And one of the things I've done since I left Social Security is I chaired a commission at the Bipartisan Policy Center with Senator Conrad about 6 years ago. And we came up with a set of proposals that actually did fix Social Security over the long term. But it was a sort of based on 50% coming from revenue taxes and 50% slowing down the growth of benefits, especially for the higher income. We actually increased benefits for the lower income. And the math can be done, but there's no political will is the problem. We said certainly the tax max, the maximum amount that you have, salary you have to pay in benefits should be increased. Maybe even the payroll tax should be slowly increased. The retirement age should slowly be increased. We could look at the inflation factor, which is too rich. And there's a whole series of things that people have talked about over the years on how to fix Social Security.
Hold that thought, and we will come back from our break in just a minute. My guest, James Lockhart, Jim Lockhart, who has written the book, America Underwater and Sinking. We'll be back with our conversation in just a minute.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult, and that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And my guest, James B. Lockhart III. He is the author of America, Underwater and Sinking, which sort of chronicles his role at the heart of several financial crises, financial challenges facing the country over the last 3 decades. And Jim, one of the things I like is you, especially on the Social Security reform, you go through some of the inner workings of what's happening as you're trying to do reform, because President Bush is for reform. You're working for it. As I understand from your book, the head of the Social Security Administration at the time was not a fan of reform. And as working in the think tank world at the time, we were pushing for reform because we, like you, thought maybe the window was closing for the chance to actually get personal retirement accounts there. Talk a little bit about some of the machinations that go on behind the scenes, because people don't always know what's happening behind the scenes in the government.
Yeah, well, obviously the government has career employees and political appointees. And oftentimes political appointees get the job because they know somebody, not necessarily because of their great skill set. And that's one of the underlying themes of my book is political appointees should come in with good management experience, but also support the policies of the president, obviously, because they're part of the administrative branch. That's very important. Sometimes you find people that think that they know better than the president, that they know the politics better than the president. That they think the president is wrong, and obviously, if that's what they think about, they should probably resign. And that happens. My concern, and it's the process, is that often political appointees are there for only a couple of years. They're there to sort of get a notch in their career ladder and go for a better job, and that sometimes means that they out for themselves and more interested in doing interviews and doing hearings in Congress than they are running an agency. And something as big as Social Security needs management, but management also means not only the day-to-day management, it means the strategic long-term view of the agency and where it should be 10 years out. And oftentimes, just the way our system works, unfortunately, that doesn't happen as we, and that didn't happen in personal accounts, which we were both in favor of. So, that is an issue. Another underlying theme in my book is that Congress is slow at acting. Congress will create a program and not really thinking it through, do something that is not totally well thought out, and then not really review it again until there's a crisis. I mean, all my jobs, one of the key things was spending a lot of time working with Congress trying to get reform. We did get it in PBGC a year after I left, and many times since. Social Security never, and as we'll talk, Fannie and Freddie, we did get it 40 days before we had to act. So, one of my concerns is Congress loves to create programs, but they're not very good at fixing them. And that is a big problem that we have in our country, especially when you have 150 insurance programs and so many other programs out there. We're leading to the big deficits and all that other issues that we're facing.
And one of the things that can happen here is when an administration is trying to do something that needs reforming and it's hard to reform, the opposing party oftentimes picks up on that and uses that to make hay. And, of course, with the Social Security reform, Democrats really highlighted that and just hammered the president with it.
Yes, they did. They hammered me, too, but the president much more than they hammered me. But, yeah, no, it did happen. It does happen. It becomes very political. Probably more political now than it was back then, because you would find, I did some town halls with congressmen from both parties, and they were actually civilized in those days. But it's even the politics has even gotten worse than those days. But it was still a problem. It's still a problem. Oftentimes, what happens is Congress, loves something and won't change it. And then when there is the crisis, what they do is they just throw money at the problem instead of fixing the problem longer term.
You were involved with the Social Security reform. A lot of people probably didn't know what was happening there, but as this moves on and you're no longer doing that, you end up becoming the head of the oversight group of the federal government housing agencies, and there's something everybody was familiar with because of the housing crisis. What happened there?
Well, what happened was, again, it's a variety of things. First of all, there was a tremendous speculation in housing. There was a real bubble going on. People were buying second and third houses and with very little money down. Credit checks were not being done. There was things called liar loans where people had no assets and no income were still getting loans. Fannie and Freddie were two of the biggest quasi-government agencies involved. Obviously, there was the Federal Housing Agency and Ginnie Mae as well. But Fannie and Freddie probably at that point had 30-some% market share. And now they're close to 60%. But at that point, one of the things, they had a lot of pressure on them to do affordable housing, and which is a really important goal. But to do affordable housing, they lowered their standards. But even more importantly, they bought mortgage-backed securities created by Wall Street firms that were very poorly underwritten. But they only bought the AAAs, so assuming it was really high quality. As it turned out, they were not. So the problem, as the regulator of those two giants at that point, was that Congress, again, had created an agency, my agency, with very limited powers. They allowed Fannie and Freddie to guarantee mortgages. That's what they did. They just packaged these mortgages up and guaranteed them or bought them from others, and with 1% capital. So, today's banks now are required to have almost 10% capital. So even though their books were actually probably better than almost any other mortgage originator at that point, or guarantor at that point, with 1% capital, if you have a 2 or 3% problem, you're bankrupt. And Fannie and Freddie, we kept telling Congress that. I took over the job in mid-06 after Social Security reform didn't work. And from day one, asking Congress to give us legislation to have more power over Fannie and Freddie. But they loved, especially the Democrats, loved the affordable housing mandate and the way that they were helping lower income people. Unfortunately, they hurt lower income people. In the crisis, there were 8 million foreclosures. At one point, going back to the title of my book, America Underwater, 25% of the mortgages in this country are underwater. That means that the house was worth less than their mortgage. So they'd gone through their total down payment and were underwater.
And you had people just walk away from their mortgages, didn't you?
Yes, some people did. I mean, that was what some people were accountable to do. Of course, that meant that their credit was wrecked, and it would be a hard time to, get another mortgage or get any, a credit card even going forward. It was a really big problem, and unfortunately, we didn't get the powers to do what we needed to do until 40 days before we put them in a conservatorship. I mean, the good news is the conservatorship worked. We did stabilize the mortgage market. I was very involved in the troubled asset program as well as one of the directors. And the combination of those two put in by the Bush administration really did stabilize the market. And probably we wouldn't have had the crisis except the week after we put Fannie and Freddie in conservatorship, Lehman hit. And that really was caused the massive not only U.S. problem, but worldwide global financial crisis.
Mm. Do you think we've have we fixed it so that it probably won't happen again the way it did there in 2006 and 7?
Well, certainly the underwriting of mortgages is done much better than it was back then. And certainly the liar loans and other things are not being made. Certainly, one of the issues is the Fannie and Freddie are still in conservatorship. They have $7 trillion of mortgages that they support, and they are supported by the U.S. government.
Okay, we'll return in just a minute with our last segment with Jim Lockhart talking about the financial troubles of the United States. Stay with us.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back with our final segment with Jim Lockhart talking about his book, America Underwater and Sinking. We have a link to that on the Point of View website, so I'd encourage you to go there. And if you want to know something about, if you want to look behind the curtain as to how your government operates, especially when it's facing a financial crisis, it is a very good book to go look at. Jim was in the middle of those things. He's written it very well. It's easy to read, and I'd encourage you to take a look at that. So, Jim, we're now facing some other financial issues. We've got the budget that they're trying to get through. We've got Moody's that just downgraded the federal government following a couple of other financial rating firms that have downgraded the federal government's credit rating previously. What kind of lessons did you learn from your years involved in the government, and what can that tell us about what we're facing now?
Well, we are have a tremendous deficit at the moment. The debt outstanding is like $36 trillion. It will go up about $2 trillion a year, and the latest version of the tax bill will add another $3 trillion over the 10-year period. And one of the in the last couple chapters, as you know, in my book, I talk about how some of the things we have to do to fix it. And certainly, you got to start where the money is, and the money really is in Social Security and healthcare. If you add up Social Security, healthcare, that's Medicare and Medicaid and other government health programs, and interest now, which is growing dramatically, and certainly the downgrade will make interest rates go up. It represents about 80% of the budget of the United States. So anything else, the other 20%, you can manipulate. But on the spending side, it's very hard to do anything without touching Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid. And that's underlying lesson. And it's a tough one. I think it can be done in a manner that's friendly to individuals, but really helps out their long term, and especially their kids. And that's part of the thing. We are borrowing from the future, from our kids and grandkids, and that's just not right. So we need to do something. There's a series of things. We need to have better political management. We need to have a lot less people in the government, but the right people. We need to fix government systems. That's another thing that's a real problem. Social Security has a system that's 60, 70 years old. It's been patchwork over the years, and that's one reason they have so many people. And that's a lot of other government programs are that way. Congress has always been penny wise and pound foolish. There's things that they should be doing that would save money long term, but cost a little bit more in the future, just like personal accounts we talked about. And so these are the kinds of lessons that we need to apply. And unfortunately, Congress is much happier about decreasing taxes, creating new programs, creating new tax benefits, rather than going at the heart of the problem, which unfortunately is Social Security and healthcare expenditures, and somehow keeping down the interest costs, which the only way you can do that is to reduce the deficit.
When I've talked to people in the past about the enormous federal debt that we have, some of them pointed out, well, it seems that people, countries, individuals, corporations are still willing to buy our debt as we go out and sell that debt. But the day may come, I'm concerned that the day may come where others say we're not going to buy the debt of the federal government anymore. And what happens then?
Then interest rates skyrocket, and that would be a problem. Already with being AA with all three of the rating agencies, there'll be some people on the margin that will not be buying as much of our debt, and interest rates will go up, and by the end of the 10-year period, interest may be it's already more than the Defense Department, but it could be even more than Social Security by the end of that 10-year period if we don't do something. There is a risk there. Unfortunately, as I said before, Congress has a really short-sighted attitude and does not think long-term, perhaps because, every 2 years there's an election, and it just means that most of the time they're out fundraising and rather than fixing problems. The other issue is we have so many government programs. As I mentioned, 150 insurance programs, but there's so many other that no congressman can really understand all the programs, or even the ones that they have jurisdiction over. And that is a problem. So they rely on the staff, and the staff has biases too.
So what would you, if you were given the power, if you were made president, where would you start? Would you start as President Trump has, or would you'd be looking, I guess, for efficiencies in the federal government? What would you do with Social Security and with Medicaid? They've been talking about reducing Medicaid spending. The Republicans have. They're getting a lot of pushback for it, but my understanding, the budget reconciliation bill that they're coming up with, the first draft, has some Medicaid reductions in there.
Well, the biggest one is obviously Social Security, and I would start with that, but you got to be very, very careful not to upset the elderly and show them that their benefits will be continuing going forward. But we have to slow down the growth of benefits. We have to slowly increase taxes. And for Medicaid, yes, they're talking about a work requirement for healthy single males. That seems to make sense. There obviously should be some grace period if someone's fired or something like that. But there's ways to work around it. Certainly, it sounds from what I'm reading that the states have taken advantage of the U.S. government on Medicaid, and that should be looked at. Medicare is much more complicated than Social Security. Social Security is, some people said, is a mathematical issue because you take the levers of benefits and taxes. Obviously, medical costs are going up higher than inflation. We're having a lot of great innovations in medicine, but they cost a lot of money. Again, there are proposals out there. I've seen a lot of good ones that start to slowly look at various ways to reduce Medicare costs. And we need to do that too. But the only way I think it can work at this point, and it's been proposed even in the last Congress by the head of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, is we need, and several senators, we need a commission, bicameral, in other words, House and Senate, bipartisan, probably some experts, to again look like Simpson Bowles did, 20 years ago, to actually look at this and take a realistic view of it. And some people suggesting that they should come up with a series of proposals, maybe just on Social Security, maybe just on Medicare, or maybe a combined set of proposals, and then have an up and down vote, just like they did with, way back when they were trying to close Army bases, and no senator or congressman wanted their base closed, but it did work then. One of the examples I cite in my book is we had an office in South Dakota, one-person office. That person retired, and we were not allowed to close down the office. I mean, that's the partisanship we sometimes have in this country. You will have to let it go with that. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your book with us. My guest has been James B. Lockhart III, his book, America Underwater and Sinking. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you, Merrill. I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you. And I'd encourage you to go take a look at the book when we come back. Dr. David Dockery, president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, will be joining us by phone. Stay with us on Point of View.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday, in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/sign-up. Point of View will continue after this.
Going through the stations and caught Kirby and a very interesting topic. So just listening to it, and so just by hearing the topic, I can relate to some of those topics. But it has impacted my life a lot. I enjoy listening to the station.
I appreciate Point of View. You've been great and wonderful. A lot of information, and I really appreciate all your work you do.
My wife and I have listened to Point of View for about 17 years now. We just want you to know how much you have meant to us in our lives. I've gotten a real education since I've started listening to Point of View.
I want you to think, what would we do? How ignorant would we be if we didn't have Point of View? And come on, guys, give something to Point of View to make sure we don't lose this wonderful voice. And thanks again for what you do.
Thank you, Kirby. I consider this my school time, so my 2 hours of school each day. So thank you very much.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And joining me by phone, Dr. David S. Dockery. He is the 10th president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth. He's been president since September of 2022. He also serves as Distinguished Professor of Theology there and Executive Editor of Southwestern Journal of Theology. He has a long career being associated with various Baptist colleges and universities and distinguished in that field. Dr. Dockery, thank you for joining us.
What a delight it is to be with you this afternoon. Thank you for this invitation.
And as I think we've mentioned to you, our producer here took a class from you, I believe, at Criswell College some years ago. So there's a connection there. And I am
he was a fine student.
Well, maybe so. But I myself graduated from Southwestern in 1980 with an MDiv in there from the seminary. So it's good to have you on and have you join us now. You know, Point of View is nationwide. We've got a lot of Baptists who listen to the program, but not everybody's familiar with what Baptists believe and a little bit about their background. So start us out by telling us a little bit about what Baptists believe.
Well, Baptists are Orthodox Christians who affirm the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, co-equal and co-eternal, one God, three persons who are but have diverse functions. So with that, they stand in line with the historic Christianity over the past 2,000 years. They clearly affirm the deity and humanity of Christ, the Holy Spirit as the life giver, that men and women are created in the image of God but have sinned, fallen short of His glory, and therefore are in need of regeneration, salvation, redemption that comes through the work of Christ and only by grace through faith. They believe that those who are united in Christ should gather as part of the church, of which Jesus Christ is the head, and they live with expectation of the return of Christ and the promise of eternal life. So historically, with all Christians, we affirm those, the Holy Trinity and the deity of Christ. With those from the Reformation period on, from the 16th century, Baptists affirm the full authority and inspiration, sufficiency of Scripture, and the need for recognizing that only by God's grace can one stand right before God and be justified. Then with the revivalists and the pietists since the 18th century, we believe in the work of the Spirit in the life of the individual and in the church. So the Baptists have connections with other Christians throughout the years, but there are some distinctive things that Baptists believe, beginning in the 17th century, that have to do with the nature of the church and religious liberty, understanding of baptism and the Lord's Supper.
Have there always been Baptist, even if they didn't go by the name Baptist?
Well, there have always been a group of people who have recognized the importance of being a people who put their faith in Christ and do so personally, not just receiving the tradition that has been passed on, and believe in some form of believers of baptism, showing publicly your affirmation of Christ to the world. But as far as having organized groups that we could call Baptist, that really begins in England in the early 17th century. So we are connected historically with those who've gone before us, who took a stand on important things that we would now say are Baptist distinctives. But as far as having what we would now call a Baptist churches who practice Baptist beliefs, that really begins in the early 17th century.
Southwestern is a Southern Baptist institution, but Southern Baptists aren't the only Baptists here. I know there used to be the strict and particular Baptist and other branches of Baptist. What do the other branches look like in America?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's go back to England if we can, to the 17th century, where Baptists began as general Baptists. So the first Baptists in the 17th century were general Baptists, and that is they believed that the salvation, that the work of Christ should be offered to all because Christ died for all. And so there was a general atonement by Christ and thus a general invitation to everyone to believe. About 30 years later, a group of Baptists came along who wanted to reshape those salvation beliefs a bit, being more in line with the Reformed and Calvinist tradition, and they were called particular Baptist because they believed in the particular redemption of Christ for the elect and for his people. And so in the 17th century in England, you have two groups side by side, the General Baptist and the Particular Baptist, at times working together and at times at odds with each other, and both unfortunately ran off the theological track a bit along the way, with the Calvinists, the Particular Baptist sometimes becoming hyper Calvinist, and the General Baptist becoming somewhat Pelagian in falling into the trap of humans stressing human effort and human decision making, and both of those needed corrections from the other group. Fortunately, in God's good timing and his providence, by the end of the 18th century, when missions really started with William Carey, the two groups came together and rallied around the importance of missions. But both of those groups made their way from England to America in the 17th century, with the first Baptist being located in Rhode Island in the 1630s. And then there are two major pockets of Baptist initially, one in Virginia and one in Massachusetts. But the two or three first associations in which Baptist churches gathered together and said, let's work together with shared ministry and cooperate for the sake of missions, took place in Philadelphia in 1701, then in Charleston, South Carolina.
Dr. Hold that thought. We've got to take a break. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The Department of Health and Human Services has released a 409-page study that reviews the evidence concerning gender dysphoria and transgender medicine. President Trump's January 28th executive order calls for the department to publish a review of the literature on best practices for promoting the health of children who assert gender dysphoria, rapid onset gender dysphoria, and other identity-based confusion. The report finds that many of the studies done in support of transitioning minors suffer from serious methodological flaws. The report finds that the U.S. medical associations create a perception of consensus in favor of pediatric medical transitions, such as puberty blockers, gender transition surgery. They also conclude that there is no evidence that pediatric medical transition reduces the incidence of suicide, which remains fortunately very low. In many ways, the report reinforces others that have surfaced. The most significant was the UK's Cass review, conducted by British pediatrician Hilary Cass. It found little evidence that puberty blockers and surgery improve the mental well-being of children. Other countries, including Sweden and Finland, have also backed away from such medical interventions. The growing international alarm about gender transitions hasn't reached the U.S. until recently. That is probably why the report's 9 authors, medical doctors, medical ethicists, and a methodologist, choose to remain anonymous. They have seen the vicious attacks against anyone challenging transgender surgery. Although the report makes no policy recommendations, it does challenge some of the current practices. This is what has been needed in the transgender debate. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of Patriot Preachers, go to viewpoints.info/Patriot Preachers. Viewpoints.info/Patriot Preachers. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back. Our guest by phone, Dr. David Dockery. He is the 10th president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, located in Fort Worth. And Dr. Dockery, I'm sorry I had to interrupt you. We were facing a hard break there, but you were talking a bit about some of the Baptists as they came to America.
Yes. Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to begin where we left off. So there are 3 major associations, gatherings of Baptists in America in the early 18th century. The first in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and then 2 in the South, one in Charleston, South Carolina, and another in Sandy Creek, North Carolina. And the one in the Sandy Creek, North Carolina, tended to represent more the general Baptist stream that we mentioned earlier, and the Charleston Association tended to represent more the particular Baptist stream. And so Baptists in America have worked side by side now throughout the 18th, 19th, 20th, into the 21st century with both General Baptist and particular Baptist in the North and in the South.
Now, Southwestern was founded, I believe, in 1908 by Dr. B.H. Carroll. Why did he feel like we needed a seminary in Texas?
Yeah, that's a great question. Their educational institutions were associated with Baptist life, going back to the 18th century, with some institutions that still exist that have completely lost their Baptist identity, like Brown University in Rhode Island, or Colgate University, some of those schools, and then coming down the eastern seaboard with Richmond and Wake Forest and Furman and Mercer and Stetson were universities or colleges that initially had strong Baptist affiliation. And in the middle of the 19th century, Southern Baptists coming out of South Carolina, out of Furman College, Furman University as it's known today, began a freestanding seminary with the vision of James P. Boyce and the founding of Southern Seminary in 1858, 1859, that eventually moved to Louisville, Kentucky after the Civil War. B.H. Carroll was the leader of Texas Baptists and helped bring them together in the last quarter of a century in the 19th century and recognized the need to educate ministers here beyond what Baylor could do. And B.H. Carroll was closely associated with Baylor, having been the pastor at the First Baptist Church of Waco. But he wanted a contextualized understanding of how to do ministry in the, developing Southwest, which was very different than the East Coast at the time. And ministers needed to understand how to relate to that. So he had a vision, I believe a God-ordained vision, to start a separate seminary, which began at Baylor University in 1905 and then separated from Baylor in 1908. And so Southwestern Seminary was started in 1908 in Waco, Texas, and then moved to Fort Worth in 1910. And B.H. Carroll was in many ways a great blend of the particular and general Baptist, and was able to bring Texas Baptists together, rallying around Southwestern Seminary, and Texas Baptist and other Baptists across the Southwest have kind of claimed Southwestern as our seminary, for the last 120 years. And it's been a wonderful thing to see B.H. Carroll's vision develop.
A lot of seminaries over the years have sort of drifted from their initial beliefs and message, but Southwestern has stayed firm on that, hasn't it?
Southwestern Seminary, of all the seminaries associated with Baptist life, has been the most consistent through the years, for which we can thank God. There have been an occasional professor or two that drifted to the left and, probably swerved outside of their lane, but nothing like the drift that took place, for instance, at Colgate, Rochester, at Rochester Seminary in New York, or that took place even at Southern Seminary in the middle of the 20th century, and even with the Southeastern Seminary in North Carolina. So Southwestern has maintained its Orthodox beliefs, and certainly has led the way in its commitment to evangelism and missions, and has really been the Great Commission seminary for Baptists, preparing missionaries, more people serving in global context, cross-cultural context around the world, have been prepared at Southwestern Seminary than any other institution in the country. And so that's been the hallmark of Southwestern Seminary, is a commitment to Orthodox Christian faith and a Great Commission impetus to take the gospel to the nation.
Now, Southwestern, what does it look like today? How many students do you have? I know at one time you offered the Master's in Divinity. You had a theology school. You had a religious education school. You had a music school. What does it look like today?
Well, it looks very similar. We still have 5 different schools: School of Theology, a School of Church Music, School of Educational Ministries, and a School of Evangelism and Missions, all doing offering master's and doctoral level degrees. But we also have added an undergraduate program in the last 20 years that we now call Texas Baptist College, and it has about 300 students. So it's a small undergraduate program, but it allows Southwestern really to serve students from 18 years old to, we have students in their 70s. So it's quite the age range, even though the primary age range of our students is still in the 20s and their 30s, those coming out of college. We have about 3,600 students from almost every state in the United States and nearly 60 different countries. So Southwestern is moved far beyond B.H. Carroll's vision of being a school to serve the Southwest. It truly is a national and international seminary with students touching every continent represented in the student body. It's a beautiful thing to observe. Among those students, the majority of them are master's students pursuing Master of Divinity degrees or Master of Art degrees or Master of Music degrees, but we also have about 600 doctoral students, some pursuing Doctor of Ministry and professional doctoral degrees, and about another half, about 300 of those pursuing research degrees, PhD work. And so Southwestern Seminary is an institution with probably the greatest breadth of offerings of any seminary in existence today. And so we're the 5th largest seminary in the world, and we're grateful to God for the privilege to serve the students that the Lord sends our way.
My guest for this segment, the next segment, is Dr. David Dockery. He is the 10th president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. We have a link to the Southwestern Seminary on our website if you'd like to go look and just sort of scroll around there and see more about the seminary. It has been a large, influential seminary over the years. Dr. Dockery, when we come back, I'd like to get a little bit of your sense of how you're preparing students for a lot of the challenges that are out there these days. There was a time when it didn't seem like Christians were that interested in politics or economics or anything. Then you had Jerry Falwell come around, the moral majority. Christians started getting an influence in just a lot of things that were happening in the country, sort of outside of our theological feelings and so forth. It just created a new movement out there, and the Christian movement is a very influential force in American politics these days. So stay with us. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the challenges facing Christians and how they're responding to it with Dr. David Dockery.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And we're back with our final segment with Dr. David Dockery, president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth. And Dr. Dockery, we on Point of View here, we frequently have somebody from First Liberty Institute, Kelly Shackelford, or one of the other people there, talking about religious liberty. You have a number of social issues that have emerged as people are trying to press those in ways that Christians and Baptists would just not feel comfortable with. What is the role of the Christian and the Baptist in trying to address the society these days?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the issue of religious liberty has been a hallmark of Baptists since the 17th century.
Mm-hmm.
We stressed the importance of freedom of conscience, and that men and women, particularly those who have been regenerated by God's Spirit and are being directed by God's Spirit, should be able to make decisions about their religious beliefs apart from the interference of an authorized church, like the Church of England back in the 17th century, or Roman Catholic Church in other parts of Europe during that time, or in what were the initial strongholds of Anglicans and a few others in the United States during that time. So Baptists have strongly pushed for religious liberty. 105 years ago this week, in 1920, George Truett, then the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Dallas, Texas, stood on the steps of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and preached one of the greatest sermons on religious liberty in the history of Baptists over the past 400 years. And so religious liberty has been at the hallmark. And so Baptists have pushed for this and said that our conscience should not be coerced on things where people would try to force us to affirm things that are contrary to Scripture, contrary to what God has made known. So particularly those hot-button issues over the past 3 or 4 decades have had to do with the sanctity of life and the sanctity of human sexuality and covenantal marriage. And now even the definition of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. And so Baptists have been at the forefront of these issues, largely driven out of our heritage and commitment to religious liberty. And so I'm grateful for Baptists today, and it's carried on through various places, but Baptists today who stand for the sanctity of life and for an understanding of the distinctiveness of male and female, and that human sexuality is reserved for covenant marriage relationships. And so we have not budged on those issues and do not want to do so, and consider them important matters of religious liberty for our day.
What is the role of the Christian and the Baptist in being politically active? I mean, it seems like there was a time when you could just sort of let politics go and you didn't have to worry about it as a Christian, but increasingly you have to, because politics gets involved in religion.
Yeah, there's still, probably two streams of thought in that regard in Baptist life. One would be more passive and withdrawn from culture, separating from culture so that our lives are not stained by the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is another group who still want to be faithful and unstained by the world, but think there is an importance to engage the culture and find ways to speak truth into that culture, and do so in ways that are faithful to a prophetic stream in Baptist life. And so here at Southwestern Seminary, we have a key course in the Master of Divinity curriculum called Christian Worldview and Cultural Engagement, in which we want to prepare our students to be able to think Christianly about the great ideas of history and the pressing issues of our day.
What's next for Southwestern?
Southwestern's had a few rough spots in the 21st century, and some of those have been rather public, but I am grateful to God and praise Him to be able to tell you today that Southwestern Seminary is stable, that our enrollment is trending upward, that our board and administration and faculty are united in a shared effort to advance the mission. We're very hopeful about the future and working together collaboratively to prepare the next generation of God-called men and women to serve in churches and parachurch organizations and counseling sessions and educational settings, and particularly in cross-cultural global mission settings. So we're very hopeful about the future. Southwestern's in a good place, a stable place, and God has been providentially kind to Southwestern over the past 30 months, for which we're grateful. And so I think the whole campus, students, staff, and faculty are quite hopeful about the days to come.
If some of our listeners want to know more about the Baptist, do you have a book or two that you could recommend?
Oh, that's a very good question. The first book that I would recommend is a book called The Baptist Story. The Baptist Story, authored by Anthony Shute, C-H-U-T-E, Nathan Finn, F-I-N-N, and Michael Haykin, H-A-Y-K-I-N. Anthony Shute, Nathan Finn, and Michael Haykin, The Baptist Story. That would be my first recommendation. The second one would be a book called Baptist in America by Tommy Kidd, and that's another outstanding book. It's a little more technical than the Baptist Story, which is very readable and accessible. And then if you're interested in Southern Baptist, I don't want this to be self-promoting, so forgive me, but I have a little book called Southern Baptist Consensus and Renewal, which describes the history of Southern Baptist and some of the issues facing Southern Baptists and how we can find consensus to work together for shared ministry in the days to come. It's not nearly as good as those first two books, but it's more focused on Southern Baptist, if that might be the interest of some of our listeners. But I'd start with The Baptist Story. I think it's an outstanding volume.
Very good. Thank you so much, Dr. Dockery, for joining us and taking us through some of the issues and history of Baptist, and we really appreciate your work and your service there at the seminary.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed the privilege to be with you today, Merrill. May the Lord's blessings be yours.
Thank you. And that was Dr. David Dockery. He is the 10th president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He is also a distinguished professor of theology there and editor of the Southwestern Theology Journal that the seminary produces. And he mentioned a couple of books. I'll repeat those. The Baptist Story, he seemed to be very, very supportive of. That's a book that I think is probably for general readers to be able to get a general sense of Baptist history and thinking. Baptist in America, because Baptists have played a major role in America. My recollection is that the Baptists were more supportive of Thomas Jefferson than John Adams as president, even though John Adams was a more orthodox theological Christian and Thomas Jefferson was not. But because of Thomas Jefferson's belief on religious liberty, I believe the Baptists were more supportive of him. And then he also talked about the one Southern Baptist consensus. And renewal and some of the issues that Baptists face right now. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about Medicaid because we have, as I mentioned earlier, in our first segment, they're trying to push through the reform efforts on the budget, trying to get together with that reconciliation budget. One of the programs they're trying to reform is Medicaid. Republicans have had proposals for reforming Medicaid for some time. As I understand it, they have a few of those in the budget that they're looking at trying to push through, but not as many as they could. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about what they could do on Medicaid and how we need to get behind some kind of Medicaid reform, Medicare reform as well. But Medicaid is the federal state health insurance program for low-income people. It exploded since the pandemic. It has begun coming back down a little bit now, so it's getting a little more to where it was. But it is a major cost program for the government. We need to reform it, and we'll look at some ideas when we return on Point of View.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And I'm back, Merrill Matthews, with sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. I want to thank Dr. David Dockery for joining us in the last three segments, talking about Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary and Baptist. But now we want to turn a little bit back to our first hour when we were talking to Jim Lockhart, because Jim mentioned about the programs that are stressing the finances of the federal government, and one of those is Medicaid. Now, people sometimes get Medicaid and Medicare confused. Medicare is the federal health insurance program mostly for seniors, also some other people who are involved in that, but mostly seniors. Medicaid is a federal state health insurance program for low-income people. Both Medicare and Medicaid were created in 1965. They've both grown significantly over time, with Medicare, especially for the senior population that has grown. But with Medicaid, they've expanded the program several times over the years, and so it's become a much larger program. And Republicans are looking for a way to try to get control of that program. They have had suggestions in the past, things they've wanted to pass. I'm not sure that they're in there on this reform effort they're looking at right now, but I want to point out three of them. One of the things they've long wanted to do is just block grant Medicaid funding to the states. So the way Medicaid works right now is the federal government provides funds and the state provides funds for the Medicaid population. In 2024, the federal government and state governments together spent $914 billion on Medicaid. That's nearly $1 trillion on Medicaid, and 64% of that came from the federal government. So each state gets its portion. It varies with states depending upon the state's income and so forth. It's called a federal matching grant. Even though it's more than a match, the federal government provides at least 50%, and in many cases up in the 60%, and in a few states more than 70% of the federal of the funding for Medicaid. So Republicans have wanted to do what they call just a block grant, saying to the states, Connecticut, Kentucky, Arizona, Texas, New York, you're getting this much from the federal government, so we're just going to give you a block grant. We're going to give you this amount of money, and we're not going to be spending any more. We're just going to give you X amount of dollars to spend, and if you want to spend more at the state level, you're free to do that. You just have to pay the difference. So the block grant does a major. It's the importance of the block grant is it caps how much the federal government's going to spend on Medicaid as it gives the money to the states. And there have been proposals to say we allow the Medicaid block grant to grow by 1% plus the rate of inflation. If you allowed Medicaid block grant to grow at 1% plus the rate of inflation, you would cut roughly $800 billion in current projected Medicaid spending over the next 10 years. That's important because Republicans are looking to cut $880 billion in Medicaid spending over the next 10 years. It's a big chunk of money, but it's a big program, and it can be done over the 10 years. So that's one option they could do. But there's others they could do. They could just, if they wanted to just cap certain things, they could do that as well. So there's a number of ways that they could do this. In fact, in Medicaid, there's roughly, about an estimated, I think, $50 billion, $30 to $50 billion in what they call improper payments. That's partly that's partly fraud. That's also partly money that is errors that are made and so forth. If you said, we're not going to give you that money to the states because it all happens at the state level, we're not going to give you that money that's being used for fraud, that would cut a certain amount of money going to the states. So you can cut Medicaid spending just by allowing it to let it grow at 1% a year and with the rate of inflation, and that would still reduce the Medicaid spending, the projected Medicaid spending by Republicans' proposed $880 billion. Another thing they could do is if they did that, they would then provide flexibility. Now, one of the things that's happening right now is that states game this system. We've talked a little bit about it here on Point of View, but they have various ways that they increase what looks like Medicaid spending so that they can get more money from the federal government. They want to try to stop that, and simply by the block grant that would do that, then you give the states flexibility. California has expanded Medicaid to some people who are here undocumented, some illegal immigrants. You could do that, but California would pay the additional cost. Medicaid also expanded under the Affordable Care Act back when it passed in 2010. It was an effort to try to get states to expand the number of people who were covered by Medicaid. You could cut that back to the original provision of Medicaid, which is primarily women, children, people with disabilities, people in nursing homes. That's low-income people in those areas. Get back to the original approach for Medicaid, and you would be able to save billions of dollars if you did that. And finally, you could move Medicaid to what we call the Medicare Part D program. So in Medicare, seniors are able to get a prescription drug benefit. It is called Medicare Part D. They pay a portion of the premium. Then the federal government negotiates with drug companies in order to, or at least private insurers negotiate with the drug companies in order to try to get the prices down. That has worked very, very well. It's not like the negotiation that the federal government wants to do now under the Biden administration. They wanted the government negotiating this Part D program. Private insurers negotiate with drug companies to get reduced prices on the drugs, and that has worked very well for people, and it has reduced costs. In fact, it spent less than what had been predicted for it. So you could essentially go to a Medicaid Part D program simply by relying on the structure that's already out there among drug companies and health insurers. Most people on Medicare are in private what we call Medicare Advantage. It's a private insurer that you assign to provide your insurance. Medicaid already does the same thing. Most people who are just getting health insurance through Medicaid are in essence getting it through a managed care company. So you've already got that structure set up to be able to go to something like a Medicaid Part D, and then you get prescription drugs at lower cost to people on Medicaid in a way that already works. Right now, the prescription drug benefit in Medicaid is just a mess because of the government requires the lowest price, and then states require a rebate if they provide the drug, and then some states provide a supplemental rebate. So the drug companies have to give the states a bunch of money that they can use to spend however they want to. So we'd like to be able to just get away from all that stuff and get to a much simpler program in which the states get a block grant from the federal government. They have maximum flexibility to be able to do what they want to with those funds, but the federal government's amount is capped at that block grant, so you can't game the system by trying to do things to get more from the federal government. And then you would end up having a Medicaid Part D program, which would provide prescription drugs for people so that they get wide access to prescription drugs. They're able to get lower prices for those because Medicaid covers most of the price, but the program would get lower prices because they would be negotiating with insurers that provide that, prescription drug companies and insurers. So I would propose that. I think that would be a much better way, and that would get the savings that they want. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to thank Megan for doing the engineering, Steve for doing the production, for our guests for coming on, Jim Lockhart and Dr. David Dockery. Penna is going to be in tomorrow. She'll be sitting in for Kirby tomorrow, and then I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll be talking with Dr. Titus Kennedy about who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. I think you may find that surprising. Thank you for joining us on Point of View today.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.